Thousands of self-help books, millions of hours of inspirational broadcasts, and countless dignified speeches from the elite have relentlessly hammered a dogmatic truth into the minds of the masses. A successful person must know how to master their emotions. Emotional management is hailed as the master key that opens the doors to wealth, power, and financial freedom. They tell you that you must know how to hide your anger, always maintain a cold head, and practice meditation to find inner peace amidst a world full of upheaval. But behind those beautiful pieces of advice, heavily scented with philosophical enlightenment, lies one of the most brutal and insidious logical traps set by privileged forces to manipulate the rest of humanity. The concept of emotional mastery has never been applied equally. Let us look down at the bottom of the economic pyramid, where the majority of humanity is struggling to make a living. For billions of ordinary workers, controlling emotions is actually a form of the most brutal labor exploitation, known as emotional labor. Look at the restaurant servers, the customer service call center agents, or the nurses who must work exhaustingly during night shifts. When employers demand that they master their emotions, it means they are being stripped of their right to be human. They must force their bodies to produce industrial smiles, pretend to be attentive, and strain to swallow humiliation when being unreasonably insulted by customers. The lower your position in society, the less your emotions belong to you. The sadness of the poor is viewed as a barrier that reduces labor productivity. Their righteous anger is labeled as a blatant violation of discipline. The tears of a hired worker are a useless luxury that obstructs the circulation of cash flow. For the working class, emotional management is a sentence that forces them to grit their teeth and endure injustice without being allowed to emit any sound of resistance. You are oppressed, but you must not be indignant, because indignation is a lack of control. You are exploited, but you must not complain, because complaining is carrying negative energy. By attaching natural human emotions to moral crimes, the elite have succeeded in creating an invisible prison where the vulnerable voluntarily lock their own mouths with the very fake restraint they were brainwashed into believing is the truth. But look at the very top of the pyramid. For those at the head of the capitalist food chain, emotional mastery carries a completely opposite meaning. It is not about smiling patiently to please others. It is the complete annihilation of compassion. To ascend to positions of absolute power, an individual cannot carry the massive burden called humanity. They call it business acumen, superior strategic thinking, or the decisiveness of an outstanding leader. But stripping away those flowery terms, the essence of emotional mastery among the top tier is the ability to desensitize oneself to the pain of fellow human beings. A report on global inequality has exposed a cold truth. Fewer than 60,000 people, equivalent to 0.001% of the world population, hold a vast amount of wealth, 3 times the total assets of the entire 4 billion poorest people combined. How can a tiny group of people, who could fit inside a single stadium, monopolize the survival resources of half of humanity? The answer lies in the very capacity for emotional mastery they so take pride in. That enormous fortune was never built on benevolence. It was built on cruel decisions made in silent boardrooms, where financial reports always carry more weight than the lives of tens of thousands of people. When a certain chairman decides to fire 10,000 employees right before the holiday season to beautify a quarterly profit report, he is not allowed to feel guilty. Imagining the scene of tens of thousands of families losing their source of income, children without full meals, or sick people losing their health insurance is a type of psychological risk that could shake the will of the oligarchs. Therefore, a successful person at this level must know how to kill empathy. Megalomania and coldness are disguised extremely skillfully under the veneer of professionalism. This macroeconomic system is designed to handsomely reward individuals whose psychological makeup is closest to that of mindless machines. As long as you still feel remorse for stripping someone else of their livelihood, you are still just an ordinary hired hand. Only when you can devastate the livelihoods of tens of thousands of people and still sleep soundly at night are you qualified to sit in the chair of those who master the world. Look at the middle management class, the effective mercenaries who serve the ultra-rich day and night. They are people caught in the middle of the class abyss, frantically following the lifestyle and mindset of the elite, with the naive belief that one day they too will step into the inner circle. They greedily read books on leadership mindset, participate in expensive grit-building courses, and try to mimic the coldness of the tycoons. They take pride in being able to stand before a crowd of subordinates to announce benefit cuts in a steady tone, without stumbling and without showing even a flicker of remorse. They blindly imagine that frozen expression is evidence of great career maturity, but they fail to realize that they themselves are merely shock-absorbing tools, born to take the brunt of the workers' indignation on behalf of the masters standing in the shadows. Their attempt to strip away their own emotions does not turn them into bosses. It only turns them into emotionless pawns, ready to be discarded mercilessly once their utility has been exhausted. The chilling irony lies in the fact that the elite use their own absolute apathy to profit from the weakest emotions of the common class. While they practice tranquility and meditate every morning to achieve a coldness of mind, they spend money hiring the world's most brilliant minds to design algorithms aimed at stirring up the indignation, fear, and greed of the masses. They want ordinary people to be drowned in a tangled mess of chaotic emotions. They want us to be angry with one another, tearing each other apart over trivial ideological differences. They sow anxiety about appearance and fear about the future to herd the crowd into frenzied shopping sprees as a form of self-deluding sedative. The more the crowd loses emotional control, the more smoothly the money-sucking machines of the financial tycoons operate. This system requires absolute psychological vulnerability from the consumer and absolute indifference from the creator of the playground. You are advised to live altruistically, to be tolerant, and to learn to love your fellow man. These are beautiful words created to keep the flock of sheep standing obediently within the fence. If all the destitute people at the bottom of society learned emotional mastery in the exact same way the elite do, that is, learning to ignore morality to seize maximum survival benefits, then this entire unjust world order would collapse overnight. The ultra-rich understand this better than anyone. They monopolize cruelty to seize resources while simultaneously distributing resignation to the rest of the world through hypocritical moral lessons under the guise of self-improvement. Why must a successful person know how to master their emotions? Because in a blood-soaked chessboard operated by destructive competition, emotion is a fatal weakness. Kindness breeds concession. Love creates moral boundaries. Empathy leads to the sharing of interests. All of these are mortal enemies of the process of unlimited capital accumulation. To seize ultimate power, a human must undergo a brutal psychological surgery, cutting out the software containing humanity and keeping only the hardware of pragmatic calculation. Observe the way the economic rulers operate this world. When a river is poisoned by industrial chemical waste, the miserable people living along the banks will weep, will be filled with ultimate indignation, and will feel heart-wrenching pain seeing their children suffer from grave illnesses. That is the natural reaction of a biological creature called a human being. But on the other side of the battle line, the dignified board members of the waste-discharging corporation look at the problem through a completely different lens. To them, a dead river is merely an acceptable variable in a cost optimization equation, and the meager compensation for devastated lives is just a tiny line sitting humbly on the balance sheet. Their lack of emotional expression is not because they are braver than the average person. They are not sad, not happy, and not afraid because they have placed themselves outside the human species, looking down from their ivory tower at the tragedies they created like soulless gods. And so, the bitter cycle continues endlessly. Miserable people, those stripped of both voice and dignity by the system, scrape together every sweat-soaked penny to buy books on how to get rich, greedily listening to bland speeches on emotional management from the very people who pushed them to the brink. We grit our teeth and endure the torment of the ruling class, trying to put on a smile of resignation for fear of losing our family's meal, and tragically deluding ourselves into thinking we are practicing the great patience of great men. We lull ourselves into believing that as long as we know how to show restraint, as long as we know how to swallow the bitterness, one day a worthy reward will fall from the sky. But that reward never exists. The resignation of the masses is not a ladder leading them to heaven. It is the infinite fuel to burn, and operate the meat grinder of brutal capitalism. The rich become even more supremely powerful thanks to absolute apathy, while the poor sink deeper into the quagmire of stalemate because they have voluntarily surrendered even their final emotions of resistance to the exploitative system. A successful person must know how to master their emotions, simply because a monster cannot do a good job of tearing its prey apart if it still lingers on the heart of a human being.